At 1:47, near 59 degrees north in the Baltic Sea, the container ship Baltic Spirit suddenly went dark. Its AIS transponder was switched off, turning 15,000 tons of steel into a silent shadow just 800 meters from Estonian territorial waters. Moments later, a supply vessel moved in and began transferring high-pressure fuel through a 12-inch pipe under the cover of night. Overhead, a U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon surveillance aircraft captured the entire operation with its long-range infrared system. Yet despite seeing everything unfold in real time, the crew received strict orders to hold position and take no direct action, even as the last cubic meters of fuel were pumped aboard for departure. Why would a force as powerful as the United States simply watch as a covert operation played out in front of them? Even more unsettling, Russian Kilo-class submarines, often called the black holes of the sea for their stealth, were waiting below the supply ship in ambush with their torpedo hatches already open. They had taken up position in advance, prepared to engage anything that came too close. At first glance, the situation appeared to be entirely under Russian control. But what Moscow did not anticipate was that the US had already set an extraordinary response plan in motion to reverse the balance. No missile exchange, no artillery confrontation. The American move would defy every expectation. So what exactly was the US Navy waiting for? The answer begins to unfold in the next few minutes of this razor-edge standoff. Now rewind to 047, 1 hour earlier. The P-8 Poseidon's detection of the Kilo submarine was no accident. Even before the Baltic Spirit disabled its AIS, a fiber optic sensor grid on the seabed had already registered an unusually low-pressure fluctuation, a signature consistent with a diesel-electric engine shifting into silent running mode. In response, the P-8 deployed a network of multi-static sonobuoys. Working together, these buoys formed narrow digital sound beams capable of cutting through the electromagnetic interference coming from Kenrad. What they revealed sent a shock through NATO command centers. The Kilo submarine was sitting completely still, but in a state of maximum combat readiness, with torpedo tubes 1 and 2 already open. At the same time, Russia released mobile acoustic decoys, creating dozens of phantom contacts crawling along the floor of the Gulf of Finland. The effect was devastating. It became nearly impossible to isolate the real submarine and build a reliable firing solution. On the surface, Russia's choice of a refueling point exactly 800 meters from Estonian territorial waters was no coincidence. It was a calculated gray zone move. The location was close enough to benefit from Naisar Island, which acted as a natural breakwater and helped stabilize the extremely delicate high-pressure fuel transfer. A single outside impact causing a pressure failure could have turned the area into a major environmental disaster, releasing 840 tons of diesel into the sea. Russia was betting that NATO would never risk such consequences, not with the environmental danger and the legal complications of international waters hanging over every decision. From Moscow's perspective, it held the advantage on the surface, in the electromagnetic spectrum, and on every rung of the escalation ladder. They believed NATO had only two options: stand back and watch, or step in and trigger a catastrophe. What they never imagined was a third path, one the US Navy had already set in motion in silence, a move capable of reducing Russia's layered defenses to nothing more than useless metal in a matter of moments. And that was the part no one on the Russian side saw coming. At 2:15, with just 25 minutes left on the clock, the silence over the sea was broken by a short-coded transmission from the US 6th Fleet to Estonian command. Action authorized, move now. Instantly, the Estonian patrol boat Raju surged forward through the waves, racing toward the 800-meter boundary at full readiness. Overhead, commando helicopters dropped to just 100 meters, sweeping powerful searchlights across the deck of the Baltic Spirit. In the middle of the night, a fast boarding operation was set in motion. But Russia had expected exactly this kind of move. The moment Raju crossed into a range of 1,200 meters, the Podlet K system aboard the Baltic Spirit switched into an intense focused jamming mode. In an instant, the Estonian boat's radar screens and radio channels dissolved into static. And that was only the first layer. Deck-mounted water cannons on the Russian vessel roared to life, throwing up massive sheets of spray that quickly turned into a dense wall of mist, blinding the helicopter's infrared systems above. Then came the move from below. The Kilo-class submarine made its play by releasing a wire-guided underwater drone from one of its launch tubes. Moving at 40 knots, it advanced silently, connected by an ultra-thin fiber optic line that gave off no electromagnetic signature, making it virtually undetectable to Estonian sensors. Approaching Raju from the stern, the drone deployed a high-strength polymer cable net. Seconds later, the Estonian vessel's propulsion system screamed under the strain and shut down. The engineer's alarm rang out immediately. Propeller fouled, engine overload. In a matter of moments, Estonia's 900-ton patrol boat was no longer an interception force. It had become a powerless mass of drifting steel, left motionless in front of the very ship it had been sent to stop. Russia had neutralized NATO's immediate response without a single conventional strike. For the Estonian officers on board, the shock was immediate. Then another message came through from the Americans, cold, direct, and final. Withdraw all units, return to base immediately. Estonia was ordered to pull back every remaining asset toward the coast. Above them, the US P-8 Poseidon kept circling in silence, watching the entire scene unfold without offering any visible support. To Russia, it looked like confirmation that NATO had backed down in the face of submarine pressure. But what seemed like hesitation from the Americans was hiding something far more dangerous and far more deliberate. What looked like a retreat was actually part of a much bigger game. Every move up to this point had been shaping a trap. At 2:40, after the Estonian patrol boat had been disabled and forced to pull back, the sea fell into an eerie silence. Moscow kept the airwaves completely quiet, maintaining strict electromagnetic silence to preserve the Baltic Spirit's civilian cover. But while no words were spoken, the counterpressure above and below the surface intensified at a startling pace. From the direction of the Kenrad base, the Steregushchi-class missile frigate Subrazitelny suddenly accelerated to 28 knots and headed straight for the refueling point. The ship moved without navigation lights and issued no warning over the radio. Its only message came through its fire control radar, which locked directly onto the American P-8 Poseidon. Inside the aircraft, the warning signal flashed red again and again, a quiet but unmistakable signal that any move from the air could trigger an immediate air defense response. At nearly the same moment, Russian Su-30SM fighters appeared from behind Nisar Island. Flying just 30 meters above the sea, they cut straight toward the NATO formation. Their sonic booms cracked across the water like thunder, sending a wave of psychological pressure over the Estonian crews below. Russia was now fully applying its mobile anti-access strategy, surround the smuggling operation with military force while still leaving room to claim diplomatically that everything was merely a routine exercise in international waters. Meanwhile, on the deck of the Baltic Spirit, the refueling operation entered its final 15 minutes. To shield the vessel from long-range tracking, Russia launched a digital deception move. A chain of autonomous buoys carrying corner reflectors was released into the water. Almost instantly, NATO radar screens filled with dozens of identical signals spreading outward in every direction like a school of fish. The original radar image of the Baltic Spirit vanished inside this electronic maze, making it nearly impossible for conventional systems to identify the real cargo ship. With only 15 minutes left, Russia was convinced the outcome was settled. From their point of view, the US Navy had already backed down, especially with the P-8 still circling at a distance and taking no visible action. But what they did not realize was that their own aggressive moves, especially the full activation of Subrazitelny's fire control radar, had just handed the Americans the final data they had been waiting for. The weak point in Russia's entire defense network had now been captured and stored inside the American aircraft's processor. The Silent Hammer Protocol, a covert strike designed to hit the heart of the system without a single shot being fired, was no longer just a plan. At 2:52, it was beginning to unfold. While the Subrazitelny frigate stayed focused on locking onto the P-8 Poseidon, the US Navy quietly set its next move in motion. It did not go after the ship's hull or its weapon systems. Instead, it targeted something far more important: the stream of data Russia was relying on to shield the entire operation. That meant the jamming patterns from the Podlet K system and the frequency hopping logic behind them. The P-8 began sending out an extremely brief synchronization signal, timed to match the exact pulse pattern of the Podlet K system aboard the Baltic Spirit. That was where the surprise began. Through a weak point in the connection protocol linking the Subrazitelny frigate with the civilian cargo ship, the US Navy launched a high-level spoofing operation. Quietly and with almost no visible trace, it altered Russia's GLONASS positioning data by just a few milliseconds. The change was tiny, but the effect was enormous. The Subrazitelny's autopilot now believed it was safely 2 nautical miles away from the Baltic Spirit, while in reality, the two vessels were drifting onto a direct approach path. Russia's own show of force had opened the door. By activating so many systems at once, it unintentionally created an electronic corridor the Americans could use to slip into the heart of the navigation process without being noticed. At the same time, deep below the surface, the USS New Jersey, SSN 796, began its part of the operation. It deployed what the Americans called an acoustic logic bomb, a device designed to broadcast a carefully tuned band of sound that closely imitated the control patterns normally carried through the fiber optic link Russia used for its underwater drones. The result was immediate. The drones received a false command, pulled back their polymer nets, and turned sharply. Instead of protecting the ambush, they ended up tangling the propellers of the hidden Kilo-class submarine itself. But the most brilliant move in this entire contest centered on the refueling line. The U.S. Navy directed an infrared laser at the pressure sensor on the 12-inch fuel pipe. The beam did not ignite anything and did not physically damage the system. What it did was create a thermal spoofing effect, tricking the sensor into reporting that pressure inside the line was climbing toward a critical threshold. In line with Russia's own strict emergency safeguards meant to prevent a major spill, the Baltic Spirit's pumping system responded exactly as designed. It triggered an automatic shutdown. In just 120 seconds, the U.S. Navy had turned Russia's entire advantage against itself without any direct exchange at all. The Kilo submarine was trapped by the very drone meant to secure the area. The Smuggler lost confidence in its own positioning, and the Baltic Spirit's refueling sequence was halted by its own protection protocol. Russia was suddenly locked in total technical paralysis, even while its radar screens still suggested that everything was functioning normally. That was the moment the U.S. cleared the path for the final phase of enforcement, the point where Russia had almost nothing left to block, distort, or deny. At 3:04, the balance had fully shifted. A collision warning suddenly blared across the Smuggler. With its GLONASS data compromised, the frigate was unknowingly driving straight toward the Baltic Spirit at 28 knots. The gap between them had closed to just 300 meters. With almost no time left to react, the Russian captain had no choice but to shut down the electronic guidance systems and throw the ship into a hard manual turn. The vessel heeled 30 degrees and narrowly escaped a catastrophic impact. Below the surface, the Kilo-class submarine was now trapped by its own drones, their nets wrapped around its propellers. The strain on the engines produced a sonar signature so loud it carried across the Gulf of Finland, turning one of the quietest submarines in the world into an unmistakable contact. Seizing the moment, the American submarine USS New Jersey moved directly above it and sent a sonar message ordering the vessel to surface in order to prevent a major leak. On deck, the pressure was building just as fast. American unmanned systems moved up alongside the hull of the Baltic Spirit, using penetrating ultrasonic sensors to scan the containers. What they found was streamed live over an unencrypted international channel, clear images of military components hidden inside the cargo. In that instant, Russia lost its ability to deny what the ship was really carrying. Russian Su-30SM fighters dropped low, apparently ready to wipe out the evidence by force, but they were immediately picked up by the fire control radar of a NATO F-35B squadron. In a matter of seconds, both sides were standing on the edge of a direct superpower clash, right above a sea loaded with fuel and tension. Russia now had only two real options: escalate and risk a devastating outcome, or pull back and abandon the shipment. At 3:15, the Kilo submarine was forced to surface with disabled propulsion, exposing its unauthorized military role in shielding the smuggling operation. The escort frigate Smuggler, having lost control of the situation, fell back by 1 nautical mile as Estonian special forces moved in on the Baltic Spirit under the cover of the U.S. Navy. Not a single shot was fired, yet Russia's entire defense structure, from long-range deterrence to electronic masking, had been neutralized by the Silent Hammer protocol. By the time dawn broke, the operation was over. Russian forces withdrew toward Kaliningrad and later covered the failure with a statement blaming unspecified technical problems. The Baltic Spirit was escorted to Tallinn, where 40 containers of military hardware were seized. The U.S. Navy quietly recovered the electronic warfare equipment and said nothing about victory. The Shadow Fleet itself did not disappear, but its code, tactics, and methods had now been fully exposed to the Americans. This confrontation was not decided by explosives, but by a demonstration that the U.S. could reach deep into an opponent's systems and seize control from a distance. The Baltic episode came to an end, and in its place came a tense calm as both sides began preparing for the next hidden confrontation beneath the Arctic ice.